Welcome, everyone, to Voices of NCAJ, the podcast for the North Carolina Advocates for Justice. I'm Amber Nimocks, your host and Director of External Affairs for NCAJ. Before we get started, I'd like to thank today's episode sponsor, Advocate Capital. Advocate is passionate about helping plaintiffs' attorneys get better results for clients, mainly through their AdvoTrack case expense funding service. It allows firms to track case expenses and recover borrowing costs, which makes the net cost of borrowing zero on cases they win. You can learn more at advocatecapital.com. My guest today is Chris Mumma, Executive Director of the North Carolina Center on Actual Innocence, where she investigates and litigates claims of innocence on behalf of unrepresented inmates convicted of a felony in North or South Carolina. As director, Chris also educates policymakers and legal and law enforcement communities about what factors contribute to wrongful convictions. And she supports exonerated clients in their re-entry back into society. We're going to talk about that more as we talk about the Joseph Sledge Houses of Healing. Chris, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Amber. Appreciate the opportunity to tell everybody about this.
Before we dive into the details of your new reentry project, I'm sure a lot of our listeners may already know about the Center on Actual Innocence, but go ahead and give us the backstory. How long has it been around and how did it come to be?
It was incorporated in June of 2000. It came to be because exonerations were just starting around the country. North Carolina had their first, and the Ronald Cotton case was a DNA exoneration. Rich Rosen was one of the attorneys on that case. Once people in prison learn that there's organizations looking at cases, they start sending applications everywhere they can think of. And at that time, UNC and Duke both were starting innocence organizations. So the center was established to kind of consolidate the intake and consolidate some of the work so there wasn't duplication of effort between the different law school projects. I started there in 2001.
How did you come to be involved?
I'm a big believer in serendipity. Things happen for a reason. And I developed a very close relationship with my criminal law professor, who also handled my independent study in my third year in law school. That was Rich Rosen, who was the attorney for Ronald Cotton. And then, so I had a great relationship with Rich, and I had a great relationship with Chief Justice I. Beverly Lake, who I clerked for over 2.5 years. Very different ends of the spectrum. Interesting or great about innocence work is that it should cover both ends of the spectrum, whether it's political or both sides of the courtroom. So Rich was obviously very interested in wrongful convictions. Justice Lake was very interested in increasing public confidence in the courts. So when you have exonerations, that really hurts public confidence. Really, kind of the three of us, plus Teresa Newman and Jim Coleman at Duke, kind of consolidated forces to get things moving in North Carolina.
Now, you came to law school as a second career, right? This is not your first profession.
That's correct. I was in finance for 9 years.
Was this what you expected to be doing when you left finance for law school?
Not at all. I expected to do corporate law. That was my plan all through law school. That was my plan upon graduation. That was my plan through most of my clerkship. I actually had jobs lined up with corporate law firms, private law firms. And then during my clerkship, I saw several cases where I had concerns about the outcomes and learned that the appellate courts are not the place to address those concerns, that it's not about the facts anymore. And in my corporate job, I was kind of a problem solver, and I saw big problems in the justice system, and I was very idealistic at that point, thinking I could fix some things, and the justice system is kind of resistant to change, put it kindly.
Was there one case in particular that stood out for you for either the facts of the case or the problems that it highlighted in the appellate system?
One case in particular was George Burnett, and I still keep in touch with George. It was a child sex abuse case that had a lot of the same complications you see from cases back then, with leading interviews and family conflict that led to the allegations. We have not been able to do anything for George, so he's still in prison. But that was the case that really drove me, and like I said, I was idealistic. I thought we could get to the truth in that case, but very difficult in cases with child victims.
For those who might not have a clear understanding, the mission of the Center on Innocence is is very different from the mission of the appellate court's process. What are the tools or the process that you have at your disposal that people working within the appellate system do not?
So in the appellate system, it's about the record. It's about looking at the record. What happened at trial, what's in the transcript, whether there's a constitutional claim, what issues are raised on appeal that can be addressed by looking at the record and only the record. We are looking for evidence outside the record. So we're looking for evidence that was never presented at trial, could not have been presented at trial, or if it could have been, there might be an indication of ineffective assistance of counsel for not presenting that claim. So we're looking for constitutional claims and new evidence that could be used to prove innocence. The system is based on finality, so the post-conviction procedural bars are very high. We close more cases where we believe someone is innocent than we're able to litigate for innocence. Because of the procedural bars involved in post-conviction work.
And you've been at this for about 25 years?
Almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how many formerly convicted or imprisoned people has the Center on Actual Innocence been able to help since you've been doing this work?
So I'm glad you used the word help because, it's so we've had 12 exonerations where charges have been completely dismissed. In the case, the conviction's been overturned and charges dismissed. We've had 6 other people who've been released because of our effort. Sometimes that happens when they're offered something that's called a dark plea, where it's basically an evil kind of offer, right? Like, you've been in prison for 30 years. You can wait it out until we go to hearing, or you can take a plea for a lesser charge and go home today. And that's really a hard decision to make. So we've had 6 people released under similar circumstances. And we participated in the investigation of 18 other exonerations. So identifying the cases and recommending them for litigation to other organizations or are participating in the investigation ourselves.
So this is slow, arduous work, right?
It is. We currently have 22 cases in the litigation stage. And so it's slow, difficult work in the investigation and getting access to information, but then trying to get back into court and getting a hearing granted and then getting a hearing date, it takes years.
Mm-hmm. And then once you do reach that ultimate victory of an actual exoneration, then you have a person who has been through a system, terrible system, a nightmare, and they are suddenly released and they are facing a set of circumstances that too many, but very few other people have ever faced, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's hard, being in prison for something you did is really difficult when everybody knows prison is not a good place to be. Being in prison for something you didn't do is a whole different ballgame. When you're trying to figure out every day why this happened to you, what you did to deserve this, you're having to follow the same rules, wear the same clothes, eat the same food as people who committed crimes. And the question of why every day wears on you emotionally, psychologically, physically. So the reentry process is much different and even more difficult than it is for people who've committed crimes. When someone's exonerated, they can go from medium custody to out the door, maximum custody to out the door. So there's no progression from medium to minimum to work release to taking classes to help with reentry, services that are available to people who were guilty, people who are innocent. They've kind of had enough with services that are for the guilty people. They are different. They feel different. They are different. Their circumstances are different.
So you can go from being, and most of these people have been in jail for a very long time.
Typically different.
You can go from being, last time you set foot on the street as a free person, you were 18 and now you're 40 and you're just out on the street.
You're
And
out of the street and you went through critical years of your life maturing in prison, which is just a different, just has a different impact for the rest of your life. It has a different impact.
and you've been psychologically traumatized by the state.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And everybody has a different situation, which is why it's very difficult for the reentry process because there's no standard procedure that's going to work for people. Some people have family connections, some don't. Some have friends, some don't. Some have been in touch with people while they've been incarcerated, some have cut off all communications. Some had jobs before they went to prison. Some have never held a job. Some have intellectual disabilities, which is what contributed to their wrongful conviction in the first place. Some have physical disabilities that they developed in prison. Some suffered violence while they were in prison over and over again. Dwayne Dale is a great example. Dwayne went through 19 years at 17 different prisons, was beaten and raped, and the impact to him versus a Greg Taylor, while Greg was wrongfully convicted for 17 years, he didn't ever have an incident.
Really?
Horrible experience, but
Mm-hmm.
very different.
Right, right. And now for those who don't know, like Greg was wrongfully convicted of a murder and exonerated, and but now he is living a pretty, well-adjusted life, taking pictures of wildlife in Alaska from what I
And
see.
he's a software programmer, so he's got a full-time job. He's got this photography where he's, won awards, and
Right,
he's very connected to his family. He has a lot of friends. He does a lot of travel. So there are definitely scars. I mean, I know the scars that Greg has and how it impacts him every day. It never goes away. Impacts his ability to have relationships, impacts whether he could ever live with someone, impacts a lot of different things. But
right,
he doesn't have the PTSD. He has a different kind of PTSD, but he doesn't have the kind of PTSD that a Dwayne Dale would have.
right, right. And what was Dwayne's story?
Dwayne was convicted of a rape that he did not commit, rape of a 12-year-old child. And when he went to prison, the guards passed around his conviction card that showed that he was convicted of a cross race, rape of a child. And that followed him for 19 years through the prisons.
Oh, wow. As part of the center's mission, you are hoping to help these folks who have been in prison for so long and are now getting out face the world with more support through this new project called the Joseph Sledge Houses of Healing. Well, tell me about Joseph Sledge. His bequest is making this possible.
Yes, yes. And I should add that for 22 years, the center's mission was twofold. One, identifying litigating cases. Two, policy reform, really on the front end to keep the wrongful convictions from happening in the first place.
Hmm.
It wasn't until a couple of years ago, primarily because of Joseph's death, that we changed the mission to be the third prong of reentry services. Joseph was incarcerated for 37 years for a double murder he did not commit. He was exonerated, completely exonerated by a three-judge panel of the Innocence Inquiry Commission. I had represented Joseph for about 12 years. We tried to get DNA testing on evidence and were told it didn't exist, and it took that long for them to finally find the evidence. So when he got out, he was very institutionalized. His family was not very well off. They were not really prepared to help him. It was a battle to get him released. So we didn't have the type of preparation time that we would like to have. We basically adopt our exonerees after they get out. I've had several who have lived with me for a while after their release. But Joseph really wanted to get back to Georgia. He wanted to get connected with family again, but they were not equipped to help him the way he needed to be helped, and he was not equipped to adjust to a society that had changed so much. Cell phones and computers, and he got home and was so proud to get his driver's license and got in a car and cracked a beer and started driving. And because you could drive with a beer when he went to prison.
Oh, wow.
Just the things you don't think about that have changed. The civil suits and the compensation for wrongful conviction is important. It helps them get back on their feet. There's no amount of money that can repay them for the lives they've lost. But sometimes the money can be difficult because people know they now have money, and you have friends and family coming out of the woodwork who
Right.
want help, and it's very difficult to say no. It kind of stroked Joe's ego to have people come to him for help, but he was getting manipulated in the meantime. So we had a lot of struggle with Joe and worked with him as much as we could. He had back problems from being in prison, and he ended up having had back surgery, which set him back a bit, and he got addicted to painkillers. And we put him through rehab, and he was doing a lot better as far as substance abuse. But it just the burden of life, he just couldn't handle it anymore. And it wasn't. He always dreamed he would get out and he'd have a garden and he'd have a rocking chair and he would just sit and watch his garden grow. And then his back kept him from being able to work in the garden, and all these dreams they have about how it's going to be. And life is hard when you get out. So Joe committed suicide after 5 years of being out, and it was devastating um,
Wow.
to lose him that way. And when he left us the bequest, we said, we need to do things that would be important to Joe. And so that was kind of, again, it was serendipity that I'm sorry if I'm just talking and not letting you ask me a question.
No, no, no. That's
Uh, it,
great.
Again, serendipity that I had a relationship with Mandy Locke, who was a reporter for the News and Observer and had reported on a lot of these cases. I met her when she reported on Dwayne Dale's exoneration in 2007. And she reported on Greg's and got involved in investigative journalism, and she reported on Joseph. And so she was very familiar with these cases. And she had moved out of Raleigh and moved to a farm in Alamance County called Second Act Farm because it was her second act in life. She and I was talking about a place in Ireland that's called Sunny's Place that an exoneree and her husband started. And it's a home in Ireland where people can go and kind of, I think it's more for like trying to revive themselves when they're trying to go through reentry rather than support through reentry, is my impression of what it is. But it's a great endeavor. And I talked to Mandy about that, and we talked about it several times. And then it was like, well, why couldn't we do that here?
Wow.
And she happened to she owned the farm. I say it looked like the state of Utah. It was like missing that upper corner. The upper corner came up for sale. They decided to buy the land to support the tiny homes, and so we're building the homes on their property.
Right. That's so amazing. Yeah, I actually know Alex and Mandy. They used to be my neighbors. They had when they left Raleigh and moved out to Alamance County, they had this dream that they would build a tiny house community out there. And it's so wonderful that they found a way to live that sense of community, and also they both have such a heart for
For every
social justice and for people, they yeah.
people, animals, nature, everything that touches the heart. They're
Yeah, yeah. So it's just amazing that it worked out that way.
Yeah, they have one tiny home already, and it's more of a tiny home. It's not really fair to call these tiny homes. I mean, they're smaller, but they built on a foundation, and
Hmm.
and they are going to have, they have a well, and there's electricity and Wi-Fi, and so they are. I think Mandy and Alex will end up doing more of the traditional tiny homes in addition on the property, but these are really solidly built small homes. One will be for the exonerees, and Mandy's was great in the design work and project management. One has it is smaller and it's all one floor, and we did that on purpose for older exonerees. There's a lot of porches, there's a lot of light, there's a lot of time, a lot of space for them to spend time outside. And that's one of the things that they never have a chance to do is just be free for a little while, right? Like
Right,
just go out and be able to walk out into the sun on their own, be
right.
able to walk out at night and look at the moon, be able to sit and just feel the wind and listen to nature around them. They never have time to just take that moment and embrace the things that they've been deprived of for so long.
Yeah.
The other home will be used to house family so that we can reunite them on a slower basis, friends who they want to reunite with, therapists, social workers, job training, psychiatrists to do intellectual testing if we need that, doctors to come visit So trying to take care of their needs up front. And a lot of them want to jump straight into freedom and they don't realize the psychological difficulties they're going to have. And so we want to get those addressed and recognized up front. We're hoping this works to just have them take a beat, you know,
Right.
Wendy says, take a beat and re-enter society in a slower basis, slower first, yeah.
So with the second home, you'll be able to bring some of those services and infrastructure to them where they are, rather than them having to be in like an apartment where they'd be like trying to catch the bus or get to social services or the
Or yeah,
doctor's
and
office
so we'll
or
find somebody for them rather than them having to worry about how they're going to find somebody.
right, right.
I remember when Greg was exonerated, and the first night he was exonerated, we knew that he slept with lights on in prison all the time. So he was going to be sleeping in his grandson's room, but there was no nightlight. So we went to Target to get a nightlight, and Greg was so completely overwhelmed.
By Target, yeah.
The stimulants in the Target was just too much for him. So
Wow.
when I reintroduce them to society. There's great communities around where the farm is in Snow Camp. There's South Paw out there. We can take them in there. They can go into places that are a little slower. They'll be able to visit with the animals. We're going to have a community garden. We're going to have a labyrinth walking trail. We're going to have things for them to take some time and think while we work out the right plan for them to move on.
And so you'll be able to support one exoneree at a time.
So the house is built where everything that's going to be in there, there's going to be a fold out couch, there's going to be a fold out chair, there's going to be,
Uh-huh.
a bed with a trundle, right? We're going to try and maximize space where we can. So if we're lucky enough to have several exonerees that need to be serviced at the same time, that we'll be able to do that. The second home can also be used for exonerees. We need to use that space over there because they're very close to each other, and they're also when you are stand on the porch of those homes, you can see the roof of Mandy's house. So they have this security blanket because Alex and Mandy are right there and have these fantastic, huge hearts, and they will have each other. I think for someone to be out in the woods by themselves would be, we'll have to stay at the other tiny home for a while for them to get used to the circumstances. But when the houses are not in use, Mandy and Alex will rent them out as Airbnbs, and that'll bring in money to help cover the operational expenses. We're nervous. It's never been done. There's nothing like this in the United States. So it's a first. It'll be an adventure and a lot of learning curves to go up, but we're excited to get started.
Wow. Yeah, it's fabulous, fabulous endeavor. And so how can people help if they are so moved?
Well, there's Amazon gift lists where we need things for the home, a blender, things like that, dishes, silverware. We're going to have a ribbon cutting ceremony kind of thing in May, and it'd be great to have people come out and we'll have exonerees there and they can see the farm and see what we're trying to do. It's been a financial drain. It is a financial drain on our resources that we think is important, but obviously financial contributions are always appreciated and are tax deductible. With the change in administration, we've lost 20% of our funding at the center because of loss of grants.
Oh,
So
wow.
so we're feeling the impact not only on the expenses for the tiny home, but losing funding on the other side. We want to have some sustainability for the center, which is the other thing that was important for Joe, is that this work go on for a while. So we want to make sure we're preserving part of the money he left for that purpose. But our website, which is nccai.org, has information about the tiny homes. Donations can be specifically made for the tiny homes. There's a designation there. We post information about it on Facebook and Instagram and our Twitter account so people can follow and look at pictures of what we've got pictures from the progression of the homes. And we're getting the ovens and the microwaves delivered. So they're pretty far along, but we haven't, we don't have the garden yet. And we're going to have to fix the trail going to Mandy and Alex's house. And there'll be community work days too that we will put out on our social media, have people and participate.
All right. Well, we'll make sure that we include links to your website, certainly, and your social too, so that folks can find the places to donate and to follow along as
And,
well.
and when the houses are not being used, we also would like to offer them up to other social justice organizations. I mean, there'll be the larger house will have a table for meetings, things like that. So I'm hoping I can have a staff retreat there when the homes aren't being used and things like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So
Great.
people should reach out if they have an idea.
Okay. Terrific. Well, this is really just an amazing, amazing project. I'm inspired by your leap of faith in taking this on. So, congratulations.
Well, hopefully we can talk again in a few years and I can tell you what a success it's been.
Yes, absolutely. I hope so. Chris, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Amber, for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening. We will post all the information in the show notes, and you can follow along as the Center on Actual Innocence develops the Joseph Sledge Houses of Healing.